Hey, what's up? This is Paul Guerrero, and now we're gonna talk about how to learn how to play chess. And this is something important. Nobody's addressing this topic. Everybody's just throwing at you some games. They're saying, "Oh, look at this game. Look at this other game. Look at this combination. Look at that." Okay, cool. That's a part of learning how to play chess. But show me the actual process. Like what's going on here. I remember that when I started to play chess back in the day, like 10 years ago. I was so confused, because everybody would say something different. And I wouldn't see like an actual systematic approach to how to learn chess. Like everybody was saying something like solve puzzles, watch the games of romanticism, maybe Paul Morphy, something like that. That's kind of a part of it, but explain to me the whole process. Like how does the actual learning in chess works, because this is something that differs to conventional learning of some other skills. It's not just like, oh yeah, I read about isolated pawns and then suddenly I'm a genius of isolated pawns. We're going to be deconstructing a little bit of the puzzle of how to learn how to play chess. So we're going to start with our first slide, and we're going to talk about how do we learn. Here's the thing. We have kind of a misconception there. We think that just because we know something logically, we're gonna be able to apply it in our games. Like just because you comprehend something kind of consciously right there, oh yeah, now I know how it works. And that's not necessarily the case in chess. What's gonna happen? You're gonna learn a concept, you're gonna learn some fundamentals, you're gonna learn, let's say, how to play against isolated pawns. And you're gonna go like, okay, now that I have seen this lesson on how to play against isolated pawns, I know what I'm doing. And in the next game that I play, I'm gonna just simply crush the other guy if he's playing with an isolated pawn. Next game comes, you sit down right there, you're looking at the position, there is an isolated pawn, and you don't even notice what's the changes, or what are the changes that this isolated pawn is making in the position. You're absolutely oblivious to that. You commit a lot of mistakes, then suddenly the other guy crushes you. You're like, oh, what's going on right here? You die, you go to your trainer, to a friend, to the computer to analyze your game, something, even just by yourself. You sit down there, you go like, there is an isolated pawn. How come I didn't see this isolated pawn was changing the dynamics of the position in this and that way? How come I was totally oblivious to that and I got crushed because the isolated pawn wasn't exploited, or it was an advantage or something, whatever? And you go like, but I just had the lesson a second ago. Why is it that now I cannot exploit it? We have to comprehend that in chess, there is a gigantic distinction between knowing something logically and being able to apply it in your games. So here's how it is going to work for you. You're going to sit down there, you're gonna learn a lesson on, let's say, certain tactical motive. It could be certain strategical idea. It could be a pattern. It could be an opening, whatever. You're gonna say, okay, I get it, But actually, you're not gonna get it so fast. So what's gonna happen is that you're gonna sit down in your games and you're kind of gonna get crushed, because you were oblivious to the elements of the position that, even though you kinda learned them before with a lesson or something, now you're not able to apply them in your games. You're gonna get crushed, you're gonna analyze your games, you're gonna rectify on them, you're gonna come back to another game, you're gonna get crushed again. This time maybe you overemphasize the value of an isolated pawn. At the beginning you started by ignoring absolutely the value of that pawn that you had right there and all of these weird things. And now you're kind of doing it in an over-the-top way, right? And you get crushed because of that. So you're gonna keep doing that. You're gonna keep experiencing, not doing it enough, or not working with the thing or the topic that you had in your lessons enough. It's kind of like throwing a ball to, let's say, a basketball to a ring, right? Sometimes you're gonna throw it like too strongly. Sometimes you're gonna throw it like without the correct amount of energy, and that's not gonna lead you to the results that you want to. But when you get the sense of how it works and you throw the ball in the proper way and you make like a point or something, then what's gonna happen? You're gonna start to get it, right? And you're gonna keep reinforcing the patterns and the correct amount of energy that you have to apply to get the results that you want. So to this process, I have given it a name. I call it calibration, which is a process through which you acquire a new knowledge in chess. Is you get a concept, Sometimes you start to use a concept in an over-the-top way. Sometimes you do it in a way in which you require a little bit more of emphasis. Sometimes you simply ignore it, you get crushed because of all of those aspects, and eventually you get a sense on how it works. You throw the ball and then you make the points, right? And that's something important for us to recognize right there. It's not just as if, oh yeah, I've gone through the lesson, now I know what's happening. No, it's not the case. It's just like with any other sports, when you have, like, let's say a ball, and you have to error correct the amount of energy that you're using and the technique that you're using to get the best outcomes. So that's something important right there. Don't just assume that because you have gone through a lesson on something, you're gonna learn something right away. The way in which we learn chess, it's by error correcting. And that's something terribly important. Eventually you're gonna get a sense of what's going on. Now, so here's the thing. When you're learning any activity, there are 4 stages of competence and consciousness that you have to comprehend and you have to go through in order for you to get the skill that you're trying to learn. Here's the thing. Let's say that you try to become a chef tomorrow, right? And you have never touched a knife. You have never gone to a kitchen. You have no idea about what you're doing and stuff. You want to learn the new skill. If you want to do that, you're gonna have to start by a stage of uncompetence and unconsciousness. What does that mean? You have no idea about what you're doing, therefore you're unconscious, and also at the same time you are absolutely incompetent because you're cutting something with a knife, for example, and what's happening there? You're making like these horrible patterns, things are not working pretty well, everything is just absurd. You go like, what's going on here? I thought this was gonna be easier and stuff, right? So eventually somebody comes and he tells you, okay, look dude, you're not doing that properly. You're kind of just moving your little hand in a way in which that's not gonna work. You have to do it this way. And now you suddenly realize that. You go like, oh my god, wait a second. It wasn't about me doing this movement, it is about me doing this new movement that I have learned from this guy. So now you're aware that you're doing the thing improperly, but even then you are absolutely incompetent because even though you're trying to learn the technique, you're still not good with the technique, right? You have to go through that process. This might take a lot of hours, this might take a second, who knows? It depends on the ways in which you learn. It depends on the process that you are submitting to. But this is something really important. Now, what happens afterwards? You get to the next step, which is conscious competence. Eventually, after you have error corrected so much with the new technique that you have acquired, then you're going to be able to get the results that you want. You're going to be competent. But here's the thing. You're going to be conscious about it. And what does that even mean? You're going to have to think consciously each time that you cut something so that you cut it in the correct way. It's not going to be automatic, right? You're going to be there. You're going to be trying to cut the thing, whatever. And it's going to be working, but you're going to have to use all of your mental resources to be conscious about what's happening there. Because if you're not, then maybe you might cut your finger or something, or you might just make it in the incorrect way. So eventually, after you have practiced like a lot, this often takes a lot of time. You cannot just assume that you're going to learn how to do this tomorrow. That's not the case. Eventually, what's going to happen? You jump to unconscious competence, which is like the ultimate state, like the state of a chef, if you will, in which the guy is going to cut everything and he's not even going to think about it. He has done that so many times before that it's just natural for him. It becomes like a second nature. He kind of flows and he's able to do that without even using that much of his mental resources, and that's something really interesting right there. So that same thing happens when you're learning how to drive a car. At the beginning, you might not be able to drive it. You're like, what is going on here? What are all of these little things? You're not able. And eventually, after you try for a while, then you don't even need to think about it. You can even talk with other people while you're driving. You can be focusing on listening to a song in the radio or something, whatever. And you don't even need all of your mental resources to be good at the thing that you're doing, to be competent at driving. That's what we want to accomplish in chess. But don't just assume that this is going to happen from one day to the other one. This might take years because chess is complex. Chess is something difficult to acquire. And as anything, you have to go through these stages. So, bad habits. Here's the thing, people often assume that whatever they are doing is kind of okay. And that's not necessarily true. here's what's gonna happen. Let's say that nobody has ever given you any instruction in chess, and you just sit down there and you say, okay, let's try to figure this thing out without any structure and without any corrections. You're there, you're trying to learn the thing the best way you can, and that's really cool. But here's the problem. In the process, as nobody's ever correcting you, you might be acquiring bad habits. And eventually, after you repeat these bad habits for a long while, what's gonna happen? Now they become unconscious, and now you're thinking wrongly in automatic, and that can be really problematic for you. So you have to be terribly careful, because these bad habits that you can acquire can make your whole game stuck. You might just be stuck because then your bad habits are dragging you down, and then eventually you're not gonna be able to even be conscious about what's happening. You're gonna blame the universe. You're gonna say, oh my god, what's going on here? I don't know, maybe this is for the smart people or something. I'm not a part of that group. I don't know, whatever. But that's not necessarily the case. The case might be that you are possibly incorporating a lot of bad habits in your thought process, and therefore you're getting bad moves as a result, but we are not conscious of these kind of things. So we have to be really careful, and there should be someone to error correct us, to kind of show us what the mistakes were, what the mistakes are, what's going on here. It's not just about trying to learn how to play chess by itself, because you can do that, you eventually will learn, but it's so much slower. Like, if you don't have a proper structure and the proper habits, it's so much harder to get to comprehend chess and the ways it works. So be really careful, because if you acquire bad habits, you might have something entirely counterproductive in your thought process. And now you might think, yeah, Paul, I don't think so. But here's the thing. I've been teaching people how to play chess for about a year, and maybe even more than a year, and these are people with a rating between 1400s and 1700s, 1800s, right? So that's something that's happening right there. I've been listening to their thought process, because literally, if you watch in my YouTube channel, you're gonna see how I've spent like countless numbers of hours trying to listen to people and figure out the ways in which they are thinking, which are keeping them stuck, and trying to comprehend what's going on with them. And something that I find in many occasions is that they have such bad habits that are not allowing them to improve. And these habits are so ingrained in their thought process, are unconscious. They don't even have awareness about them, that they never correct them, and they keep having bad results. So bad habits, I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, it's so important. Now, that's something important to learn. Don't just assume that you don't have any bad habits. You might. And actually, I think you should. If you're watching this, you have. Even I have some bad habits sometimes. So that's something important for us to recognize there. Awareness. Here's something important. Now that we comprehend all of those weird things that I've been talking for a while, we have to understand the role of awareness. What do I mean by awareness? Awareness is basically the process through which you recognize that something exists in the universe. But what do I mean by awareness? Awareness is basically to realize the things which are happening in front of you, or the things which are happening inside you. That's kind of what awareness is. You realize what's going on. The first step for you to improve in chess is to get awareness. If you don't know what your mistakes are, how do you improve on them? How do you get better results? You need to understand what the problems are first. Is that we need to be aware of our problems. If we don't know what's going on, what's wrong, then how do you solve the problems that you don't know you have? Terribly fundamental right there. Now, this is another thing here. Carlsen is cool, but he is not that important at this point. Everybody loves Carlsen. I love Carlsen. The guy is a genius. Really cool. But here's the thing. Do you really need to know how to play like Carlsen at this point? Carlsen is like 1,000 points ahead of you. Ahead of me. Ahead of every mortal. This guy is like really strong. Do you really understand what's going on with Carlsen if you don't understand what's going on with Steve? And what do I mean by Steve? Steve is that player, who's like maybe 50 to 100 rating points above you. The guy always crushes you. You have no idea why. He has like this gigantic power over you. When you sit down to play against him, you go like, oh, damn, again, Steve? What's wrong with this Steve guy? I cannot win to him. If you don't understand Steve, how do you understand Carlsen? How is Carlsen more relevant than Steve? Shouldn't you, instead of learning how to play like Carlsen, learn what's the thought process that allows Steve to get the results that he gets, acquire that thought process, and then just use it, and then find Steve's Steve, which could be John, for example, the guy who's crushing Steve all the time. Then you go like, oh my god, how's this guy thinking? And then you break down his thought process, and then you're like, oh my god, maybe this is the way. And then you learn from the guy who is better than this guy. And I think that's a more approachable way to learn how to play chess than to just expose yourself to a bunch of Grandmaster games. Because you're not going to understand the subtleties if you cannot understand the primordial elements, Think of it as really advanced physics, If you sit down there with a book of really advanced physics, but you haven't gone through Physics 101, do you really understand what's going on right there? I doubt it. You might. I mean, who knows? Maybe you're a special guy. Maybe you learn things even faster. You don't need the fundamentals and stuff. But in my experience, and in the experience that I have had with my students, the way in which it works is to not forget about Carlsen, because you can take things out of his games and stuff, but not to make it your priority, to learn from many different resources, to learn from games which are going to explain fundamentals, principles, and thought processes which you have to adopt. So, that being said, let's talk about complexity, right? Here's the thing. The word complex, and this is something that I repeat a lot, but it's so fundamental. The word complex comes from the Latin complexus, which means woven. Many little things woven together, which are pretty simple, create something complex, right? So we have this little image here in our screen, right? It's like a knot of threads, like a bunch of these little threads together creating this really complex knot. But what's that knot in reality? That knot is nothing but many little threads, and if you're able to decompose all of them, then eventually you can make sense out of the knot. Same thing happens in chess. And now we're going to talk about the layers of complexity in chess. Now, when you're starting to learn how to play chess, here's the thing. You're exposed to this gigantic amount of information. Everything is kind of weird, new. You go like, what are all of these people talking about? What's a phone pawn? What is that? What's a weak square? What's all of these weird things? You have no idea, right? But here's the thing. Chess has many different layers of complexity. And this is what I want to explain to you. You have to go through them so that then you can comprehend what's actually going on in the board. Otherwise, you're going to be oblivious and you're going to be just ignoring a bunch of information that you have on the board. So, here's the thing. We have like many different layers of complexity. We're going to start by the fundamentals, This is something really important for us to comprehend. We have static value. Static value is one of the first things that you learn, right? It's basically the value that every single one of the pieces has. Everybody knows this value. It's like 5 points for a rook, 3 points for a bishop, 3 points for a knight, a point for a pawn, 9 for a queen, and the entirety of the game for the king, if you will. Right? Everybody knows that. Once you comprehend that, then you can understand the pieces and their movements, right? You can go, okay, the queen moves in this way, a knight moves in this way, pawn moves in this way. Really cool, right? But it's not really that complex. You're just kind of moving the pieces, but you don't understand what's going on there. Eventually, somebody explains to you the value of a space. They explain to you like, oh, look at the central control. Look at these squares. Look at that. Look at how the mobility of the pieces changes according to the space that they have in the position. They would show you some games and stuff. You're like, okay, that's cool. Then you start to comprehend the value of time, right? How does time affect the game? And when I talk about time, I refer to both things. I refer to the time on the clock, which is kind of obvious, but I also refer to tempi, right? Which is something so fundamental for us to comprehend what's going on in the position. So once you understand once you understand time, once you understand space, then you jump to tactics. You're like, oh, look at these combinations, this weird stuff which is going around. Then you start to comprehend the strategy. Somebody explains to you the way to maneuver something really cool. Everybody's like, yay, that's something really amazing. By the way, I have a course thrown on in Udemy about the strategy. Like, I break down a bunch of stuff right there. Anyways, we keep going upwards, and we go like dynamic value. And what's going on with dynamic value? This is possibly the most difficult thing to grasp in chess, the dynamic value of a piece. how a piece changes in relationship to the position that you have, and how the value of this piece changes. How you maybe have heard the expression "a knight on the ring is dim," right? So what does that even mean? That means that the value of a knight changes according to the position in which it is, and that's something really fundamental for us to comprehend, right? But this sounds really easy. It might not be so easy, because for you to comprehend the dynamic value of a piece, you need to understand all of the layers of complexity that you have below the dynamic value of a piece, right? You need to comprehend the static value, pieces, space, time, tactics, and strategy. Suddenly you get the dynamic value and you're like, okay, this is how valuable this piece is. Then you can comprehend trades, how to trade a piece which is not doing that much for a piece which is doing a lot, how to keep the pieces that you want to keep on the board, how to take advantage of weak squares, how a weak square can change the value of your knight, how the fact that there are certain point structures change the value of something else. And that will allow you to generate like long-term plans and all of these weird things, to think in really depth about the positions that you have on the board, as opposed to just be the guy who's throwing just your pieces around without even comprehending what's going on, you know? The guy who just knows a little bit of tactics and stuff. And here's the thing, this is how this kind of becomes even more complicated, because a strategy, you can break down a strategy even more, and you can say that, okay, strategy is divided in many aspects of it. You can talk about knights, rooks, bishops, pawn structures, king, safety, and all of these things as separated ways for you to comprehend the position in terms of a strategy, which could allow you to make a correct evaluation of the position, and all of these weird things. When it comes to tactics, you might say that it's not just, oh yeah, I understand tactics, but tactics are divided too within their own subcategories, if you will, and you have like several different motives and all of these weird things, right? So for you to comprehend tactics, it sounds really easy. Oh yeah, I might solve a couple of puzzles, but in reality it's not that easy, right? In reality, for you to comprehend tactics, you have to go through motives, you have to go through a lot of time solving puzzles and stuff, but nonetheless, there is even a correct way to do this, as opposed to just do it randomly, and we're gonna talk about that in the future. When it comes to strategy, the same thing happens. Dynamic value, then you can understand the mixture of all of the layers of complexity before, and then on top of it we have the future. You know, you might be thinking, what's the future about, Paul? Like, why is the future more important than all of these things? Because eventually you will have to be able to imagine all of these things in your brain without even being able to move it on the board. You have to imagine all of this crazy complex stuff in your brain and determine what's going to happen in the next 6 moves, 7 moves, 8 moves, 3 moves and stuff, right? Why is that? Because that's the way in which chess works. Eventually we're nothing but guys who are trying to predict the future of the position. All chess players are nothing but guys who are trying to predict the future. He who predicts the future in the correct way, the guy wins. You know, that's as simple as that. You're trying to predict the future, the guy predicts the future the better. In the most fundamental ways, this guy wins. That's something fundamental. So, let's break down a little bit of the layers of complexity here. We have a static value, in which, okay, we learn like the value of the pieces and stuff, pretty simple, nothing really crazy. 9, 3, 3, 5, 1. Nothing absolutely nuts there, just something simple. Pieces and their moves, you start to comprehend how pieces move and stuff, nothing too crazy either, like, okay, bishops and diagonals, queens, whatever, all of these weird things. Time and space, you get a sense for it, the tempo, the clock, the space in which you can maneuver with your pieces, that's really cool. And now, suddenly, as you keep adding up more and more layers, you get the knot that you have in chess, which is really complex to decompose, right? You have like a lot of threads, a lot of pieces of information put together in this gigantic knot. But here's the thing, how do you understand the knot if you don't understand the parts? That's something fundamental right there. Also, in systems theory, we have something really important, which is a concept of emergence. Emergence is basically how deep and complex systems can emerge or can appear out of the interaction of many simple things or of many simple elements. In chess, we have the same thing. Eventually, the end result of a chess position is greater than the sum of its parts, and that's the complexity that you're facing on the board, because it's not only to understand that an isolated pawn is bad, in certain given contexts, right? You cannot just say always an isolated pawn is bad. Sometimes it's really good. So you have to be careful with that. But here's the thing. This is what's going to happen. At some point, you say, no, this is bad. It's not going to be enough because you're ignoring some other threats. You're ignoring some other little elements of the complexity which are adding up. So it's not only about the isolated pawn, it's also about your king's safety at the same time. It's also about the pawn that you have, which is kind of passed around the board. You have also, who knows, a little tactic around the corner. You have some strategy. And eventually, as you mix all of these things up, then you get actual chess. You know? Before you get all of these little things, you're kind of just moving your pieces. But once you can comprehend the whole complexity, once you can comprehend how things work, once you can comprehend how the dynamics of the position change in accordance to the relativity that you have, then you start to understand chess in the way it works. Now, this is a process in which you learn chess. At the beginning, you learn how the simple elements interact with each other, and then you might say, all right, maybe in this position an isolated pawn is not that bad because of this other thing. And because of this other thing, you start to consider the elements. You start to comprehend compensation. You start to get a grasp for when a move works and when a move doesn't work. But if you don't understand the elements, you're just kind of deluding yourself into thinking that you comprehend chess. And don't get me wrong, because at some point it becomes kind of incomprehensible. You know, even for me, after like 10, 11 years of chess at this point, it's really difficult sometimes to get an idea of what's going on with a position and to actually figure out what would be the end result of it. Because chess is really complex and we humans commit mistakes. You don't have to play perfectly, you just have to play better than the other guy. So that's something important there. You just have to understand this weird knot of a lot of elements which come together better than the other guy, and then you win. You know, nothing too crazy right there. But this is something that we have to comprehend. And this is how you learn how to play chess. Now, in future videos, we're going to be talking about the entire process. We're going to be talking about your thought process. Because a move, my friend, is nothing but the end result of your thought process. It's an effect, it's a symptom, but there are causes which are hidden. And if you don't understand these causes, how do you change the effect? If you're not happy with the results that you're having right now, could it be because of these things that I'm explaining to you? Maybe you're just too focused on tactics and you're forgetting everything else. Maybe you're too focused on, let's say, pawn structures, and you're getting crushed because you don't understand how a knight works effectively. Maybe you are trying to get a sense of, I don't know, some other thing in chess, but you're ignoring the holistic reality of the game. You're just fits on one of the topics, and there are so many little things interacting which are changing the end result. Could that be possible?